Often, good things happen in my daily life, but when night falls, I feel like I don't deserve a single moment of happiness or joy. It's like a nightmare, a memory from the past that will never stop haunting me, no matter how many therapies I undergo, or how many times I try to distract myself to forget it. Here, in these words that I write, I want to tell you how my nights ceased to be peaceful, and most of the time, I feel like the worst person in the world. It happened more than 2 decades ago, at a time in my life when I worked as a food delivery driver before these delivery apps existed. A friend recommended me to the restaurant, as that was the only way they hired staff. The pay was exorbitantly high, and the contract specified that we could not reveal that amount. It was completely confidential information. Not adhering to this would cause serious, even legal problems, especially after signing. I always wondered how it was possible for an ordinary restaurant with nothing extravagant to assign such a high salary to delivery drivers as if they were professional cooks or well-known and prestigious chefs. I had already been advised to keep my mouth shut, and I followed it perfectly, even among my colleagues. Then I was assigned the order that would change my life forever. My own boss gave it to me in person. He didn't send anyone else. He said motivational words, claiming that I was one of the best workers. I didn't understand why he was saying it at that moment, but I must confess it felt good, and I was a bit more motivated to deliver the order. When I arrived, I realized that the house was too luxurious. In a few words, a mansion. I admired the dwelling before ringing the bell, something I couldn't even do in the end. And without realizing it, some people came from behind, put a cloth over my face, which caused me to faint within seconds, without being able to do anything to avoid it. I knew nothing until I woke up tied up in a dark room, lit only by candles. The walls were black, but I could make out symbols painted in red on them, like pentagrams and demon shapes. I had an idea of where I was, and then a woman arrived, escorted by men in black robes. She was the one who told me they were going to sacrifice me. They were a sect that worshipped the demon Abaddon, the destroyer angel. Moments before they acted with the knife, a woman dressed in a white robe appeared, telling them that I could not be sacrificed because the initial of my name did not match what the demon wanted that month. But those wretched people's solution was to force me to call one of my colleagues to come to that house. I was completely terrified, but to save my life as best I could, I convinced him to go, assuring him of a good tip. Almost half an hour later he arrived, and I saw with my own eyes how they did the same to him that they had done to me. They tied him to a chair while they released me, but they let him see me. He knew before dying that it was I who had put him in that situation. I cried, while they inflicted wounds on him that didn't kill him instantly, but left him agonizing. This was not a simple sacrifice, it was torture. They spent an hour on it, and finally, he died from losing so much blood. They released me after that, threatening to do the same to my mother if I talked. Months later, I learned that the same sect funded the restaurant I worked for, and my boss was a member of them. We immediately moved without giving notice to my job, and fortunately, to this day, I never heard anything about my boss or that sect again. Those monsters will always be in my nightmares. A delivery made me realize that there are many mysteries in the world that man has yet to discover, or that he has discovered and found ways to keep secret. Whatever the reason, until today I had not dared to tell anyone, for fear they would think I was going crazy or had lost my mind. I am from Mexico, and it happened when I worked as a delivery driver for a fast food restaurant. I got along well with everyone, especially my boss, who gave me a good portion of the tip at the end of the day and with whom I had a secret intimate relationship without anyone knowing. Sometimes we were the last ones left in the restaurant, and we did it in the kitchen. Other times we left early, and she used the excuse that she was giving me a ride just because it was on her way and she liked to drive. I never knew if some colleagues noticed this and kept quiet out of fear of being fired, but I didn't care. She was very pretty, with a good body. Just seeing her and the flirtatious way she talked to me brightened my nights. Despite all that, One night put an end not only to that secret romance but also to my job at that restaurant. I was assigned a delivery like any other, given a piece of paper with the address and the name of the person who ordered it. The thing is, on the way to that place, I received a call from a man who claimed to know me and told me he would give me a large amount of money if I didn't deliver that food where it was supposed to go, but instead took it to where he told me so he could eat it. I told him that I could easily help him by calling the restaurant to prepare something new for him and deliver it as soon as possible. But he insisted, saying it would be faster if it was the one I was carrying, and then he mentioned the money again. With that, he convinced me, and I said yes. He then gave me the address, and I changed my route, heading to where he told me. I had planned to give a portion to my boss to avoid problems, but that would be later. I don't know why, but I remember feeling strange as I approached. I had a bad feeling, and on more than one occasion I almost lost my balance on the motorcycle and fell. I was lucky the streets were empty at that hour, or I would have had a serious accident. I arrived at the place the man told me, but it was a parking lot. At first I didn't see anyone, tried to call him, and then I heard the phone ring. I followed the sound, walking slowly. From the way it seemed hidden, I thought maybe the person who called me was having intimate relations behind or inside one of the cars, but that wasn't the case. I peeked and looked between two vans, and then I saw the scene that would haunt me for the rest of my life. A lifeless body was on the ground, with the phone ringing beside it, but on top of him was a man. Apparently a man, but with black fur all over his body and an abnormally long torso, behaving like an animal, covered in the blood of the poor man he had just killed. I froze, and without realizing it, let out a choked gasp that he heard. That man lifted his head and looked at me with those wild, lifeless eyes, as if he felt no emotions. He didn't seem like a man in disguise. He was something else, that kind of nahual, chupacabras, or some creature from the legends told in villages. Regaining control of my body, I slowly backed away, trying not to make noise even though he had already seen me. That thing growled but didn't move from its position over the lifeless body. I turned around and headed for my motorcycle, trying not to panic. The engine started and I immediately accelerated, leaving that parking lot with my heart racing. As I headed back to the restaurant, I tried to calm down and think about what to do. I couldn't go back there as if nothing had happened. I had to tell someone, but who? The police? My boss? Who would believe me? I decided the best thing was to talk to my boss. She had always been understanding with me and might help me find a solution. When I arrived at the restaurant, she was already closing. Her expression turned to concern when she saw how upset I was. I told her everything, from the call from the man, deducing that it was that thing that had spoken at that moment, to the creature in the parking lot. Her eyes widened with each word, but she didn't interrupt me. We went together to the police station and told the story. The officers seemed skeptical, but the seriousness in our voices and the coherence in the details convinced them that they should at least investigate. The next day, the local news talked about a murder in a parking lot, but they didn't mention anything about the creature I saw. I wondered if the authorities decided to keep that part secret to avoid panic, or maybe they knew something I didn't. In the following days, I felt watched, as if someone was monitoring me. Weeks passed and my life seemed to return to normal. I had taken a few days off but returned to work at the same restaurant, trying to forget what happened. One night while closing the restaurant, my boss approached me, but not in the way she used to, as if she wanted to tell me something, and indeed, this is what she said. "The creature you saw isn't the only one. There are more of them. My uncle belongs to a secret society that hides among us. They are sorcerers, or as many know them, nahuales. Some can be peaceful, but there are others like the one you saw that can be very dangerous. You can't say anything about what you saw, or you could be in great danger if you try to make your sighting public." I was stunned, unable to process what she was telling me. I didn't know what to do or say. I was speechless and just told her I had to go. The next day I received a message from her, telling me not to return to work, that it was for the best. and I never heard from her again. Since that day, I live with the certainty that the world is much more mysterious and dangerous than I ever imagined. Maybe no one will believe my experience, but I know what I saw. A night made me think that sometimes people ignore mental health, believing it isn't important, and this leads to the development of such perverse minds that they end up transforming people into deranged psychopaths capable of committing tragedies, which they eventually enjoy. That was the thought that stayed with me from that night I will never forget. It seemed like a day like any other. I had only been working with the Rappi app for a few days, recommended by some friends who were doing very well, which encouraged me to join. I felt comfortable. The commissions and tips were well paid and I couldn't complain. That money helped a lot at home since I couldn't get admitted to any university due to low performance on the admission exams. My parents were more than upset, but working helped me a lot. On weekend mornings, I studied by taking a computer course. My father had a contact who said that, upon completion, he could get me a good job at the company he worked for, and that was undoubtedly a good motivation. It was one night when the notification for a new order came in, which I accepted immediately, and then went to the restaurant to pick it up. While waiting, they told me there that the app had been experiencing problems, as the address had been changed more than twice, but the same person who ordered it confirmed it, so everything was in order, and it was expected that the error with the address wouldn't be repeated. They gave me the order and I started the route to the place. Just as the man at the restaurant had told me, the address changed 3 different times. In the end, I got disoriented and couldn't go back and forth, so I decided to call the person who ordered it, and a girl answered, confirming a new address, so I went there. I arrived at the house and approached the door to knock. That's when I was shocked to see that the girl who came out had her clothes full of red stains. It was evident what they belonged to. I was about to run, but she suddenly pulled out a gun hidden behind her back, which left me completely immobile. She looked at me with a cold stare but smiled, telling me to come in, and if I refused, she would empty the entire clip without hesitation. In her gaze, I saw the certainty she had, and I was convinced she wasn't lying. She was telling the truth, and underestimating her would have cost me my life. I couldn't risk running and getting shot in the back, dying in such a horrible way, so I went in and she closed the door. She took me to the living room where I saw another scene just as, or even more disturbing than at the entrance. A young man was lying on the floor, bathed in a pool of blood. She told me he was her boyfriend. My body was trembling, but I didn't want to show fear. I felt that if I did, I would be in more danger, and I would be the next to lose my life. She took me to the table, and I saw a Ouija board on it. This woman told me that she convinced him to play, but by doing so, they opened the door to a demon that communicated with them, and it forced her to commit such a tragedy. In a moment of lucidity, she seemed to overcome the demon to speak on her own. She didn't seem to understand well what was happening, but she screamed at me to call the police. She then took out her phone, called the police, and gave her name, her boyfriend's name, the house's address, and what had happened that night. Before hanging up, she told them I was innocent of everything, and then she did it. She took her life with the gun. I started screaming uncontrollably until the police arrived and took me away from the scene. After investigating everything and reviewing the house's cameras, they confirmed I had nothing to do with it and let me go. We should never put ourselves in danger with situations we don't understand, but above all, with dark and diabolical matters. Thank you for listening to my story. This happened in 2004. I remember when I started studying at the university, I was a bit short on money considering all that was required of me, not to mention the cost of transportation and the times I had to eat there. So I decided to start working as a food delivery driver for a restaurant in the northern part of the city. My name is Leo, and tonight I want to share with you my story. The truth is, that job was going well for me. The salary was modest, but my boss knew my situation and helped me out with a little extra. However, one special, different, and unique delivery made me experience what I consider today to be one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, one that I would never want to repeat. It was a normal night. I had just arrived because I had to take some exams. I had spent the whole week studying, and I felt nervous because all my classmates kept saying that the professor was one of the worst, someone who could easily make us fail the course if he wanted to. I must confess that I felt I had prepared more than enough, and I answered the questions with great confidence. That motivated me at work, and my boss noticed it. That night I was supposed to deliver about 4 orders when my boss told me to stop making deliveries. In fact, he suggested that I take a break because a special delivery would be coming up soon, one that he had reserved just for me. I asked for details, but he refused to give any. The only thought that crossed my mind was a good tip, which was what I could expect if it was as special as he said. Finally, the moment arrived. He called me and told me to come to the parking lot in the back with the restaurant bag where I put the food I was going to deliver. I did as he asked, and I saw him with a bag containing the order. He handed it to me, gave me the address, and told me to be very careful, to do nothing out of the ordinary, and to limit myself to making the delivery and returning as quickly as possible. Before I left, he told me that what I was about to see should not be mentioned to anyone, under any circumstances, and that it was best to forget it as soon as I left the house, not even mentioning it to him. Everything felt strange, but when he told me how much I was going to get as a tip, things changed. It was very good money, and I wasn't going to reject it, not in a million years. So I packed the order in the bag and headed to the address my boss gave me. I couldn't stop thinking about how different this delivery was from all the others I had done since I started working for him. There was something odd about it all, but I decided not to overthink it. Finally, I arrived at the house, and I was in for a big surprise. It was curiously very far from the others, isolated. The lights were off, giving the impression that no one was inside. However, the house numbers matched those written on the paper my boss gave me, so it had to be the right place. I got off the motorcycle and climbed the steps leading to the door. It looked like a rundown, abandoned house. It felt a bit eerie being there, but that was my job. I knocked on the door once and no one answered, but on the second knock, it opened by itself, and from inside, I heard a voice telling me to come in and put the order on the table, that the money and the promised tip were right there. I had no complaints about that, especially when I realized it was a woman's voice, though the place smelled awful. But with that pay, it was the least of my worries. The outside lights allowed me to see the table, but once inside, some candles lit up, giving me a clearer view of the place. I focused so much on the table that I didn't look anywhere else. I placed the food there and grabbed the money without even counting it because it was a lot, but I immediately separated what I had to return to my boss from the tip. When I turned my gaze to the rest of the room, I was shocked by what I saw. I didn't know whether to call it a woman or a deformity. Her skin was excessively wrinkled, with a few tufts of hair on her scalp and coming out of her armpits. She was completely naked, and her posture was very hunched, walking without the need for a cane even though it seemed like she needed one. But there was something even worse next to her. An altar full of human and animal parts. Some were just bones, and others were already rotting with a disgusting smell. I was paralyzed, unable to speak, trembling with a blank mind. I didn't make a single sound. It was that thing that spoke and smiled, seemingly pleased that it already had the package, and with a coldness simply told me to leave. Seeing so many human parts made me think that if she was capable of accumulating so many bodies there, then I could also end up there if I did something to disturb her, so it was best to leave while I still had the chance. That's what I did, and when I was far enough away, I took out my phone to call the police. I told them everything I knew, and they told me not to move from there, that a patrol would arrive soon. I don't know how long I waited. It could have been very little, but it felt like an eternity to me, until I saw a car approaching from the corner. But I was in for a big surprise when it got closer. I saw that it was my boss. He quickly got out of the car and snatched my phone, telling me not to make that mistake again, to forget what I saw and return to the restaurant as if nothing had happened. that he liked me, but things could go very badly for me if I said anything. I didn't understand what had just happened. It seemed that the police were involved in this situation, but I didn't want to get more involved. I deduced that if I kept digging, things would go badly for me. So I had no other choice. I returned to the restaurant, and half an hour later my boss arrived, and we acted as if nothing had happened. The only thing I can deduce is that my boss was asking that witch for favors to ensure the success of his restaurant, just like the police. Only they would know why they were involved in this macabre situation. Maybe they were also asking for protection or something darker. 2 weeks later, I resigned.